on the second paper. Our second paper tonight, or this morning, is Housing Shock and Online Consumptions by Zoe Yang from Chinese U Hong Kong, Hanming from UPenn, and Wang from ShanghaiTech University. Presenters is Hanming. Hanming?
Okay, so I thank you for the opportunity to present this work. I will actually share the presentation with Zoe. I will go first. And Long is also in the audience, so they can help out with the questions in the chat if you have any. So the title of the paper is Housing Shock and Online Consumer Behavior. So as we know, housing wealth accounts for a very large share of household wealth. In the United States, is somewhere between about 60% of the household wealth is in the form of housing. In China, this number is much higher, somewhere between 75 to 80% of household wealth is in the form of housing wealth. And as a lot of us who have worked on the housing market in China, we know that Chinese housing prices has really appreciated dramatically across the board, right? So from 2003, we found that, for example, in China, the average annual housing price appreciation exceeds more around 13%. So and home ownership rate in China is also very high. So varies a little bit between urban and the rural areas. Of course, in rural area, the housing home ownership rate is more than 95% nationwide. In the area we'll be studying is close to 100%, 99.25%. And in the urban area, our national average is around 80%. But in the area we are studying is about around 85%. I will be specific later. So how housing wealth affects consumption is an important question. It has been studied widely in the United States. A housing price downturn could lead to significant slowdowns in economic activity. And so in terms of consumer behavior, you can consumers now can shop offline as well as online. Offline remains the dominant mode of consumption around the world. In 2020, $17.5 trillion worldwide is spent on offline consumption, despite it being a very difficult year. Online consumption, however, is rising. The total number of the amount was $4.2 trillion worldwide in 2020. Still, relatively small relative to the offline consumption, but it's growing. Right? I don't know whether I would imagine that it will remain a large fraction of the overall consumer consumption. And China has the world's largest e-commerce market. And in this paper, what we'll do is we'll exploit some very unique features of a particular big announcement, big policy shock in China that happened on April 1st of 2017. I would describe that shock in the next slide. We will use that to study the causal impact of housing wealth on online consumer behavior, which will include, for example, the amount one will spend, number of items a consumer will buy, and how hesitant they may be. When do they shop? Do they shop in the working hours? And how often are they likely to return the product, for example, after having purchased online? Okay, so studying these questions faces some empirical challenges. Typically, one challenge, of course, is the endogeneity, that there might be unmitigated variables that jointly drive consumption and housing prices. Right, so housing prices go up because of some unmitigated variables we don't capture. And that same unmitigated variables could also lead to increases in consumption or changes in consumption. The literature often exploits certain arguably exogenous shocks of in one's income or to study to get around the endogeneity problem. okay? Lottery gambling winnings or weather shocks or unanticipated government policies. For housing case, our discussant Wenlan has used exogenous to the housing price coming from the announcement of Land King. Land King, quote unquote, refers to the land sales, that the land parcel that garnered the largest amount of sales revenue in a particular city. Okay. So the endogeneity problem is one empirical challenge. The second empirical challenge is that if one are interested in knowing not just the overall effect of housing wealth on consumption, if we are also interested in mechanisms, typically it's not easy to decompose the channels through which housing price changes can affect consumption, right? So the channels could potentially include wealth effect, but also collateral effect to the extent that housing can be used as a collateral to borrow from the financial institutions. Housing price increase might also affect the rental income of the homeowners to the extent that there might be extra rooms that one can rent out, or if the person owns multiple homes, the housing price increase might result in rental income increases. And finally, there might be income effect, other income effect, labor income effect, in the sense that housing price increase might lead to housing construction booms or other opportunities, other changes in labor market that could lead to increases in labor income. That can also affect consumption. Then the third challenge is typically the micro level online consumption data. Very few papers investigate online consumption. There are some exceptions we list here that often uses data from China or such as Alibaba, or eBay consumption data used by US authors. And the online consumption data does provide some very unique information that otherwise that are difficult or impossible to observe in offline consumption. For example, as we will exploit in our paper, online consumption data allow us to observe when was the order created, when was the order actually paid, and the difference between the order creation time, order payment time will allow us to measure, for example, how hesitant the consumer is in making the purchase. The online data also allows us to perfectly observe whether the product was returned, and you will be able to observe detailed delivery address, right, etc. So we'll be using all of these online data features in our analysis. So the key here is we would like to use an arguably exogenous and unexpected housing wealth shock and use online transaction data to examine the causal impact of housing wealth on online consumer behavior and try to decompose the mechanisms. The shock we'll be exploiting is, for those of you who know China, maybe that you have heard about it, is announcement of a state-level special economic development zone known as Xiong'an New Area, right? New area, the best known new area in China, most of you, I believe, have seen it, is Pudong New Area, right, in Shanghai, right? That's where the Shanghai's financial center, is located. Xiong'an New Area was the 19th new area that China established, but probably the likely to be the most prominent one. I will provide a little more detail about Xiong'an in a couple of slides, right? So that was kept as a secret, right? Nobody knew about it when it was announced, and it was announced on April 1st of 2017. And interestingly, because of the announcement is so significant, the Xiong'an New Area was touted as a millennium development kind of news. It will become China's basically new capital, or the second capital of China, right? And you can imagine the huge interest of investors to immediately kind of push up the prices of Xiong'an New Area. Anything in Xiong'an New Area that investor can buy will be hot product, right? but the government actually suspended any real estate transaction in Xun'an new area a day later, right? So on April 1st, Xun'an new area was announced as the 19th new development zone in China. On April 2nd, the government says no. Actually, on April 1st, immediately, investors rushed to Xun'an and tried to buy anything they could get their hands on. On the second day, the government says no more real estate transactions. So the housing market, housing price obviously went up, but there's no more transactions one can do. And that was very unique. I haven't heard of any other place where anything like this happened. Okay. So what we'll do in this paper is we are going to ask 4 specific research questions. What are the impacts of housing price shock on various measures of online consumer behavior? What are the underlying mechanisms? Are the impacts persistent? Are the impacts heterogeneous across various types of consumers and the product categories? So a little bit of additional background of Xun'an new area. As I mentioned, it's a 19th state level new area. The best known is Pudong. But this Xun'an new area is the first one that was announced jointly by the Central Committee of CCP and the State Council. Right, all the other 18 new area before Xun'an was announced by the State Council, but this one was jointly announced by the Central Committee of CCP and the State Council on April 1st of 2017. I will show you a map in a second. It's located in the center of Hebei province, around 100 kilometers southwest of Beijing and 50 kilometers from downtown of the city known as Baoding. Baoding is a pretty historical city in Hebei province. And the position of this new area is unprecedented. It will serve as a development hub for Beijing, Tianjin, Hebei economic triangle. In Chinese, is Jing, Ji. Jing is Beijing, second Jing is Tianjin, and Ji is the one word representation of Hebei province. And it will provide all non-capital functions for Beijing, right? Schools are supposed to, including universities, are supposed to move to Xun'an instead of staying in the primary real estate of Beijing. Hospitals, headquarters of SOEs, public services, and financial institutions, they are supposed to move to Xun'an. And the government planned for massive investment and funding for infrastructure. Right, the plan was for is that there will be $588 billion US of infrastructure investment in 10 years in Xun'an. And the Xun'an area will span 3 counties, of Xiong County, Rongcheng County, and Aixing County. So I will show you this map, right? So Beijing is somewhere here, right? Beijing is somewhere here, okay? And the Hebei kind of surrounds Beijing. Maybe next time we'll show the map, both including Hebei province and the Beijing. But Beijing is somewhere here. This is Baoding. This is the Xun'an new area, including 3 counties: Rongcheng County, Xiong County, and Anxing County. Okay, and you can see that, the red zone is what will later on be considered as treatment region. The 3 counties that basically are the Xun'an new area proper. The real estate price will skyrocket, but no one can sell anything. At least legally, no one can sell anything. The surrounding 9 counties will be later on, we'll call them the treatment region number 2. The adjacent 9 counties of Xun'an, the real estate price also went up, but they can still trade. Then there are 38 non-adjacent counties that in the gray dotted in the gray dotted area. Okay, so I'll come back to that later, but let me go back. So this is basically the policy shock we are talking about. The announcement of Xun'an new area creates a genuinely unexpected, right? Nobody knows. It's really kept a state secret, exogenous, and a sizable housing price shock, right? Exogenous in the sense that it was not a decision made by the locals. The central government, right, the highest leadership of China, suddenly announced the news on April 1st of 2017. It's pretty much unexpected. Nobody knows about. I mean, we did a search online. There was no mentioning of Xun'an new area at all, leading up to April 1st, right? The announcement date and geographic coverage of new area were kept in strictest confidence. all members of planning committee signed the confidential agreement. In fact, people look back, the President Xi Jinping actually visited Anxin County I think this was around Chinese New Year, February 23rd of 2017. This visit, of course, was known locally, but it was made during the New Year. So, and Chinese leaders often have the tradition of visiting rural areas, during the New Year. So it was not sort of anything unusual. And but even this visit was not revealed to the public until after the announcement was made. As we look at land transaction data in Xun'an, new area, before the announcement period, it basically remained very low. I will very quickly show you the number of transactions in Xun'an, right? The solid black was almost zero, right? Right before the announcement. Unit prices were going up just like other counties. Total areas basically not much going on. All right, it's if there were news leakage of this, you can imagine the rush to acquire land in Xun'an before the announcement. And Xun'an experienced an unprecedented boom in housing price on the day of the announcement. But then government suspended all real estate transactions in Xun'an on April 2nd, just a day later, right? The housing price, listing price in Xun'an, this solid dark line, it was kind of trending up just like everywhere in China. But on the day of the announcement, it just overshoot everything, right? Rent overshoot, rent total price, number of units of rent for rent, listings actually went down, right? People actually are careful not to list because of the thing. Okay. So that's basically the setting we are looking at. Okay, so I'm gonna skip, the literature is big, but I'm gonna skip this and quickly talk about my data source. We'll have the online consumption data coming from the largest e-commerce company in China. We don't reveal the name, but you can guess what that is. We have a random sample. We have the universe of all sales made by a random sample of 1 in thousands, about 4,441 active sellers of this company from October 1st of 2016 to December 31st of 2018. Okay, we'll restrict our to a sample of local residents, buyers of local residents. These are buyers whose delivery address are located only in the same area, both before and after the announcement. We have very rich information that you can imagine in any online transaction. The transaction amount, discount amount, product name, order creation time, payment time, return status, delivery fee, delivery company, delivery address, consumer's age and gender coming from the last 12 digits of the buyer's identification card. So it's quite representative. We have high resolution, sufficient long sample period that happens to cover, right, to straddle the announcement period of April 1st of 2017. We also supplement this data, online consumption data, with housing listing price and rental price data in each county. So even though housing transaction was suspended in Xun'an, they are still listings. So we are able to capture the listing prices. We also have the per capita GDP growth rate in the county level in this period. The consumer behavior will be measuring includes at the consumption level, payment per order, number of items per order, payment per item, discount fees per item. We also are going to measure, buyers' hesitation, return propensity, and when do they make the change. This is following Gu et al. Wenlan's paper. If some order is created between the working hours from 9 to 5, we say this might be a measure, as Gu et al. Did, a measure of shirking propensity. Okay, so before I turn over to my co-author Zoe, I will just briefly mention the research design. The sample period, as I mentioned, is from October 1st, 2016 to December 31st of 2018. The public announcement event date is April 1st of 2017. We'll have 3 regions. The treatment region 1 are the 3 counties in Xun'an proper, right? They experience housing price boom, but they could not sell, right? The homeowners there cannot sell. The second treatment region is adjacent counties whose price also went up a lot, not as much as Shanghai in terms of listing price, but also went up a lot. They can sell though, right? Then the control regions are the 38 non-adjacent counties. And the way we try to get the underlying mechanism is, use the fact that in the treatment one region, the housing market was frozen. You can only use the housing to the extent that housing in the treatment region one, the three counties, right? C3, to the extent that housing prices increased, it cannot increase their wealth, right? They cannot realize their wealth right away. They can use it as collateral to increase their consumption. Their rent might increase. They can still rent out. The rental income is increasing. In the C9 county, the 9 adjacent county, there's collateral effects, rent effects, and wealth effect, all three effects, right? So we'll be using a two-step approach to disentangle the different effects. So since we don't know actually the buyer's homeowner status, so we will be saying that the comparison between the treatment region one, the 3 counties versus 38 counties, the control counties, gives us the collateral plus rent effect, right? Because the C3 counties, the 3 counties in Shanghai, they cannot realize the wealth, they cannot sell, right? So there is the housing price increase can increase consumption through the collateral and rent effect. But the C9 region, the 9 adjacent counties versus the 38 non-adjacent control counties, the difference reflect collateral, rent, and wealth effect. Okay, and we'll be able to kind of use these two differences to get the elasticities coming from of consumption relative housing price, coming from wealth effect or collateral bundled with rental effect. In order to further decompose the rent effect from collateral effect, we look at some subgroups where home ownership rate is very high. For example, in the villages, we know that home ownership rate in the villages in Hebei is 99.25%. So the buyers in the 10 villages only in the 3 counties, they only have collateral effect. And in the buyers in the 39 villages in the 9 adjacent counties, there's both collateral and wealth effect. The rent effect is gone because they are all owning homes. Okay. Okay. So I will turn over my mic to Zoe. Zoe, please.
Okay.
Zoe, you have 8 minutes to wrap up.
Sure. So for here are the summary statistics of our data, and we have summarized the key variables at the item level or order level by group. So basically we have 3 groups. So the first group only contains the buyers whose delivery address are in the Xiong'an, in 3 Xiong'an counties, both before and after the announcement. And in group 2, the addresses of buyers are in 9 neighboring counties, both before and after the announcement. So this means that the buyer who have multiple addresses across counties during our sample period are excluded. And this way of sample construction allows us to focus on the local buyers and further helps us to pinpoint the source variation of housing wealth. Next page, please. So this is a summary statistics, and we begin our analysis by quantifying the response of housing markets to the announcement of the Xiong'an new area using the specification. So we have the lot listing price or rental price on the left, and the treat J is a dummy variable equal to 1 for the treatment county, and after is a dummy variable equal to 1 after the period. So for the periods after the April 2017, and we also control for county fixed effect and year-month fixed effect and cluster the standard error at the county level. So next page, please. So and here are the results. So we find that both the new area and adjacent counties experience large housing price appreciation. So the listing price and rental price in the new area increased by around 63% and 80% more than that in the control region after the shock. And we also observe housing price and rental price appreciation in the 9 adjacent area. So at the lower magnitude, around 16% and 32%. So they also benefit from the establishment of the new area. So next page, please. And this is the we examine the response of various consumer behavior at the order level or item level. So we use this DID specification, and so basically we can categorize the dependent variable into 3 sets. So the first group include variables that review the changes in the consumption level, such as log, quantity, and payment at the order level, and as well as the log payment and discount amount at the item level. And the second group includes 2 variables that reflects the perceived risk regarding the purchase decision. And the third one is the shirking propensity. So since the announcement may attract large-scale investment and bring new job opportunities, which may increase the income of local residents, we include monthly changes in GDP per capita per county to capture the possible income effect. And we also control for the buyer and seller fixed effect to absorb the unobservable characteristics across buyer and sellers. And the date fixed effect is included, and the standard error are clustered at the seller level. And next page. Then based on our estimations on housing market response and consumer behavior response, we then estimate the elasticities of consumer behavior with respect to the housing price by dividing beta by lambda. Okay, so then we study the dynamics of the behavior response by estimating a distributed lag model. So this is a specification. So basically the coefficient beta captures the difference in response of different online consumer behavior measures between the treatment and control buyers compared with the first month, which is our benchmark period from October 1st to October 31st in 2016. So we also look into betas in the pre-announcement periods to examine whether the parallel pre-trend assumption for DID are satisfied. And here are the results, so the baseline estimation. So the left part reports the comparison between buyers in Xiong'an and buyers in 38 non-adjacent counties. And the right part compares the 9 adjacent counties and those in non-adjacent counties. So in panel A, we examine the response on consumption level and find that the shock increases the payment per order and per item significantly for buyers in the Xiong'an and for those in 9 adjacent counties. And in panel B, the discount fee is the amount discounted applied to the item. So you can, there are some coupons you can apply when you purchase online. So in panel B, we noticed some interesting pattern. So we show that the shock reduces the payment hesitation and return propensity significantly for the treatment group. So this suggests the buyers became more impulsive and decisive when they're making online purchases. And in panel C, we find consistent results with Wenlan's paper. So the results show a positive housing shock increases consumers' propensity to use work hour for online shopping. And next page is we use the results, using the results is the subsample analysis that include the treatment buyers whose only delivery address are located in the villages. So we find similar results with the full sample baseline results. Okay, so the next page is the table summarize elasticities. So here are 3 main takeaways we can draw from this table. So first one, if we compare column 1 and column 2, we find that elasticities of consumption behavior with respect to housing price are greater in magnitude in the 9 adjacent counties than those in 3 Xiong'an area counties. So this is because homeowners in 9 adjacent counties can liquidate their housing wealth. And when we look into columns 3 and 4, we notice that the collateral effect on the consumption behavior are greater in magnitude than those in than the housing wealth effect. So this implies homeowners are more likely to use the housing collateral channel to fund immediate spending needs rather than just directly sell their properties. And third one is the magnitude of rent effect appear to be smaller than the other 2 effects, which could be explained by the high ownership rates in this area. Okay, so the next.
1 minute.
Okay, so these are the dynamic analysis, the results, so these figures. So basically we find positive response in consumption level and shirking propensity and negative response in payment hesitation. So these effects persist in the long run, and the pre-shock coefficients are statistically insignificant, and parallel pre-trends assumption is satisfied in all DID estimations. Okay, so the next page, so we also conduct some heterogeneity analysis. So next page, please. Yeah, so this is based on the demographic information such as age and gender, as well as the product type. And we also have some robustness check. So here I just want to highlight maybe the second one. So we have the border discontinuity regression using the DID approach. So we limit the sample to transaction within 3 kilometers of the border between each region. So just to address the concern that the findings may result from the difference across regions. Okay, so and then we also do some robustness checks by control like a buyer quarter fix effect to address the concern that buyer may have different consumption preference for seasonal products. Okay, so just to wrap up, so we find that the housing price increased significantly after announcement of the new area, and find the positive housing wealth shock lead to consumption upgrade within sellers and reduce consumption hesitation, return propensity, and increase the shirking propensity. And we also find the collateral effects are greater than the wealth effect, and they jointly contribute the most to the elasticity of consumer behavior with respect to housing price. Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Zoe and Hanming. Discussant is Wenlan Qian from NUS.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot for the organizers to invite me to discuss this very interesting paper. And this is closely related to what I'm researching on. So I had a lot of fun and enjoy reading them much. So let me just do a very brief summary of the paper. So the paper essentially wants to provide a causal inference on the effects of housing wealth on online consumer behavior, just like the title suggests. So specifically, there are 3 aspects, or the 3 focus of the paper is the first to uncover the patterns of consumer behavioral response. Okay, in response to the exogenous house price shock that they actually use in this paper. And then second of all, they spend a lot of time in trying to understand the underlying economic mechanism to rationalize or to explain what they find in the data. And finally, they also provide some heterogeneity analysis across consumer characteristics and spending categories, again, to enrich analysis on the actual sort of both in terms of the actual patterns of the response, and also to sort of complement their analysis on the economic mechanism. So let me just start by highlighting what I think is the novelty of the paper, or what is the highest sort of a contribution, potential contribution that can be brought about by this paper. First of all, I like the research design. It's a very creative idea by using announcement of Shanghai new area, like Hanming described, or Zoe described, that actually this is an unanticipated and shock, that it is exogenous to sort of at least the consumers in the local area. And it is a rather relatively large shock, because the house price experienced a significant increase and immediate increase after the announcement of the Shanghai new area. So as Hanming mentioned, overcoming or circumventing the endogeneity problem in any types of research related to housing wealth effect is going to be extremely challenging. So I give a lot of credit to the authors for coming up with a new and creative research design. And then second of all, what I think about the novelty of the approach or the paper is that it actually has a very cool and novel data set of online spending behavior, which is very different from what people usually do, I mean, including my own work. They have data, access data to a unique and also representative e-commerce platform. And they have very comprehensive information, pretty much the universe of all the transactions of a random sample of sellers and buyers. And what I particularly like about this data set, again, given my own experience, that makes this very unique, is that actually has very granular information, not only at the buyer time level, but also you can observe the seller and the order and the item level information, including, for example, price discount, or the time it takes for people to finish a purchase, and whether people are going to return the product or not. So this is actually very unique, and which is going to come up later in my discussion. And also because of the uniqueness of the data, that empowers the authors to investigate a wider variety of outcomes. So in addition to the actual consumption related behavior, you can actually investigate specifically consumer, like sort of a preference or other behavioral outcomes like hesitation or regret or return propensity, and also like your inattentiveness at work, as the author says, shirking behavior. Okay, so the main findings, let me just very briefly say that actually they use like the two treatment group. One is the right at the center of the new area, and the other one is the 9 adjacent counties. And the control group are the sort of also kind of nearby but not immediately adjacent counties. There are 38 of them. So the sample, as I mentioned, because of the uniqueness and the rich data, they have a lot of observations at multiple dimensions, and the transaction level, item level, seller level, and buyer level. Okay, and also order level. Yeah, transaction basically order level. What they first show at just any kind of an actual experiment, if you think about it as an IV, that this basically is the first stage of the IV by showing that actually the announcement does trigger a significant house price appreciation. They both show it in for the listing price of actual homes and also rental price. And then after that, they're in the second stage, they document like three main aspects of the consumer behavior response. The first aspect is mostly kind of the one that we're familiar with, which is consumption related. And the only difference is that they they conduct the analysis at the order level, as opposed to, for example, that consumer time dimension. Okay. And the second dimension is really to document a sort of a behavior change. I mean, are you more likely to complete the purchase faster, and are you less likely to return the product? This I would sort of separate it out from the consumption, sort of typical consumption concept. It's sort of more related to your behavioral parameters. And also they find an increase in the work time shopping propensity, or quote unquote shirking behavior. And also in order to sort of provide a conceptual framework for understanding the effect, they spend a lot of time in the mechanism on focusing on the traditional mechanism, for example, wealth effect, the income effect, or the rental income effect, or the collateral effect. So by using sort of clever sort of strategies to disentangle the several channels, they conclude that it's actually probably the combined effect of a wealth effect and collateral effect. Okay, so that's pretty much my reading of the current paper. And then in the next couple of minutes, I will try to sort of share with you some of my thoughts after reading the paper. So let me spend some time in talking about the motivation, because this is something that I've been thinking about after reading the paper. So what I like about the paper, as I mentioned, is that it actually compares to usual papers or in the area that you actually cited, you actually can document very different or multiple aspects of consumer response, not only about consumption, but also other dimensions of consumer behavior. So this is what I think is the novel part of the paper. On the other hand, I'm still not fully on the same page in terms of what would be the coherent theoretical framework that can rationalize all three aspects. Okay, so from my current reading and from the way the paper is written, I think the paper is trying to sort of highlight the novelty of the data and the novelty of the result. But on the other hand, the theoretical discussion or the conceptual frameworks still tightly is linked to the consumption literature. For example, the mechanism, the economic mechanism, so we spend a lot of time trying to understand whether it's driven by wealth effect or collateral effect. That is essentially coming from the consumption literature that is highly debated, and that there's a lot of studies here and there. So this particular type of mechanism may not be, or at least may not be directly applicable to the behavioral preference, for example, the hesitation, return propensity, or the labor supply response. Okay, so this is the first question I have. And then if you think about it, if you actually tie the paper so closely with the consumption literature, then it's going to raise the hurdle in the sense that we have a very large literature on the wealth effect on consumption, housing wealth effect, as you all also cited in the paper. And also I'm adding another RFS forthcoming paper that's using the housing purchase restriction, also in China, to look at the consumption of a durable consumption response. Then the burden would be, or the bar would be to make an argument for the incremental contribution relative to what has already been done. Now, if you think about it, for example, you also talk about the potential labor response, but we also need to be careful. Again, the existing mechanism that's usually invoked in the consumption literature is not complete to account for the joint behavior of consumption and labor responses. Like you mentioned, I also have the papers in slightly related, in sort of a related area. And now we're actually trying to come up with a theoretical framework that use variations in, for example, labor market frictions, as well as, for example, liquidity constraints to come up with different predictions under different scenarios. So it's slightly more nuanced. So it's not readily sort of you can borrow from the existing framework. And the other thing that I also want to highlight is that if you actually anchor the paper on this wealth effect on consumption, which I don't think you are, but right now it sounds like it's still tightly kind of a link to that literature. Now we also need to sort of, while acknowledging the novelty and the uniqueness of the data, but also there are some limitation of, I mean, as with any data, there are limitation with data. For example, e-commerce, I know it's fast developing and also investigating in that area, but also we have to acknowledge that compared to the overall consumption, this is about a quarter of the total retail consumption in China in the most recent statistics. And if you think about in the other end markets, even in the US, which is the second largest e-commerce market, the number or the fraction is going to be quite lower than what we see in China. So then the question is, how does the result translate to the total spending response? Now, if we can argue that the offline spending is going to experience a similar type of pattern, then that might be okay. But then that potential generalization is not obvious because of a potential substitution effect between online and offline spending. It's a potential, I don't know, but it's a possibility. For example, that maybe people can make the argument that people are actually switching to online retailers because of their price advantage. Now, why do they want to do that after the new Shanghai announcement? For example, then you can make an argument that people may have a strong incentive to invest in the housing market now. So they want to save and then actually sort of by buying more discounted products and then save for buying investing in a bigger house. I mean, it is a possible, I'm not saying it is, but it's a possible mechanism. So the net effect of the sort of online spending increase and the offline spending, we don't know the direction of the response. Or maybe even if it's increasing, maybe it's increasing at a smaller scale. So then the net effect is not obvious. So I would like to actually recommend being very careful to sort of linking it so tightly to the consumption literature. And the other thing, what I think is—
you have 1 minute.
Okay, so the nature of the wealth shock, I think that also Hanming sort of a slightly refer to that. So is it something like the significant price increase, is it driven by fundamentals or potentially are driven by irrational speculation? The reason I'm asking is that if you actually look at the data on the figure on the left, the price increase is so high, is so immediate and so significant. And especially given that there's nothing yet to materialize in that very short window. So it might be because it's a combined effect of people's rational expectation of the economic prospect and plus some sort of irrational component. You might want to check the price to rent ratio to sort of to see what is actually going on. And the other thing is that the rental price, what makes me also think about this hypothesis is that rental price also goes up so significantly and so immediately. I don't think that people can, the rental market is going to, actual rental market is going to respond so quickly because the infrastructure is not there, the business has not come in, the schools have not been built. So the fact that the rental price has gone up so much, that potentially means that people are maybe sort of making or overshooting in Hanming's own words. So if that is the case, you may also, this is maybe a potentially interesting area to think about because people have not talked about what happens to consumer response when you have irrational or the housing wealth is actually partly driven by irrational speculation. How would the consumption or how would the consumer response behave differently? Given the time constraints, let me just talk about, so Yonghong, give me maybe 1 minute. Let me talk about this one more slide and I'll discuss the remaining.
30 seconds.
Okay. I think that this behavior response is actually the novel part of the paper. And I would probably encourage you also to think more along this dimension. Like, but that, to my own sort of a thought, it could fit more with the behavioral framework. So how does the sort of a windfalls, especially if the windfalls is driven by irrationality or sort of a speculation or irrational exuberance, how does that trigger people's behavioral changes in, for example, impulsiveness or in their purchase behavior or the regret likelihood and attention? So these are things I'm not very familiar with that framework, but potentially there could be sort of something to sort of to think about the connection. And if that's the case, also it will be interesting to understand the additional implication. Does it trigger overspending and other type of sort of a long run implication? One final thing, which is I think I would also want to be careful about, because you mentioned in the title and also the paper that it's actually about online consumer behavior. I'm not sure that this is unique to online. You have online data, but the type of behavior, it's not clear to me at this point that how different, for example, compared to when you shop offline. For example, if you can have the similar type of data, if you shop offline, for example, nuisance scanner data, suppose that you can observe even the amount of the time that people shop before they purchase in the offline stores, how will the result be different? So it may be different, but it's not obvious to me. So, or maybe you don't have to, we just say that consumer behavior, and then we can use the unique data from online or e-commerce platform to answer this question. Okay, I'll relay other questions or discuss it privately with the authors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wenlan. Given we have 6 minute overrun, so I will collect more questions. I saw Abdullah hands raised, and then give Hanming and your co-author 2 minutes at the end to address all the response. I want to ask the first questions. It's related to what Wenlan comments about the wealth effect. We all familiar with the housing wealth effect in Western literature, but in China context, it's quite different. Why? Because in China, the resale market is not that active. People are just want to invest to build up the wealth, but they don't want to sell, especially when the market is going up, they want to sell. And also in China, there's no cash out refinance. If house price increase, and not like a US, you can do a cash out refinance to get the equity to invest, to consume. So I was really interested if you have some data to show the transaction volume for the resale housing in Shanghai is really jumping up after that. Then I believe there's a wealth effect. Otherwise, it probably you need to discuss the mechanism as from the people's expectation. They are going to be rich. So I'm consuming my lifetime wealth instead of the current wealth. Abdullah?
Abdullah, you are muted.
So I want to ask whether you guys have data on mortgage debt of the homeowners, and I'll tell you why. First, those with a mortgage actually enjoy a bigger percentage increase in their housing wealth as a result of the price increase due to leverage, right? And so they may behave differently, or you may from that infer a clearer picture. Secondly, there are some studies, and I've done 3 of them, and one of them is actually based on China data using micro-level data, where mortgage debt actually leads to more consumption than those who buy without mortgage. And I don't, we have limited time, so I don't want to go into as to the rationale, but so mortgage debt affects more consumption through reducing uncertainty with respect to future purchase, etc. But also it affects the percentage increase in the amount of equity that the homeowners have as a result of the price increase. Thanks.
Okay. Yongheng, you
I
are
also
muted.
ask it. Can I ask a quick question? Just kind of seconding what what Yongheng was asking, and I think Abdullah as well, which is, for the collateral effect, what you really want to show is that there is an effect on debt, right? Because somehow the budget constraint has to add up. So if they're spending more, either they're spending more out of income or they're borrowing more. So if you could see the borrowing, I think that'd be very helpful.
Okay, so okay, but Bernard, or you wanna?
Yes, I want to ask a question. I wonder whether because there's no transaction after a certain day in your C3, is there any chance that your estimation for the price change, a house price change, you underestimate that effect?
Okay, so Yongheng, I know we are running out of time. I will first thank Wenlan for the great discussion. Many things for us to think about and work on. In terms of the key questions that come from Yongheng, Stein, Bernie, and Abdullah. First of all, we know that we don't have, to Abdullah, we don't have the, unfortunately, we don't have the home ownership data. We are trying to get some information about the multiple home ownership rate in the area based on electricity and water usage at the unit level. So that's a data set we are in the process of getting some information about from another cohort of mine. We don't have a direct data measure, but I think that's from today's presentation and the comments. I feel that's really important for us to establish whether collateral channel is a key channel. We are saying collateral is important. We did check with the local banks that, what Yongheng said, in China, there's no cash out refinance. For the banks we talked to, I asked Zoe and Long to get in touch with the local banks to see whether the home equity loan, that which I also thought was quite unusual, difficult to get, is possible. And we got confirmation that in Qian, the friend that Zoe talked about just had processed, who works in the bank, had just processed such kind of home equity loan. So it seems like that is a possibility, but we need to get some magnitude about household using this housing equity that they couldn't sell, but they are using it as a collateral to borrow from the bank for the consumption. And another thing that came up is that in Wenlan, that's very important. Wenlan discussion that's very important is, in principle, there's no. It's not necessary that the housing price increase will necessarily lead to consumption increase, because the area is also experiencing a boom in investment opportunity, right? So people could be saying, look, in the short run, the homeowners may say, look, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. I'm not gonna, spend on consumption. I'm gonna actually invest in something else, right? To increase, hopefully, to get more higher returns in the moment from this opportunity. So, but overall, I feel like we have quite a bit of work to do. But I appreciate all the comments from questions from the audience and from Wenlan in particular.
Zoe and Long, you have 1 minute to add a quick response if you want.
Maybe I just add one point just to respond to Prof. Dun's question. So like why the housing price is still very high in Qian, although we cannot purchase any properties there. So because I think this could result from people's positive outlook in the future development in this area, and also the people expect the purchase restriction policy will be lifted in the future. So as we can observe from their loan policy, so like after half year after the announcement, the restriction on borrowing was lifted in Qian. So people there, they also expect this kind of purchase restriction to be lifted in the near future. So there was expectation. So and another reason is government, they compensate the homeowners based on the market price if their houses are demolished during this the city redevelopment process. and also the supply of the commercial residential housing has been cut off. So the demand there remains high. And another comment responds to Prof. Yang's question about whether we we have used the listing price rather than the housing transaction price to estimate the price in the area, because we don't have the transaction record right after the announcement because it was not allowed. So it's possible that this is not accurate, but we think this. This is the only measure we can get right now from the database, and so I think this is the best available reference we can use right now. So the listing price, yeah, to estimate the local housing fluctuation. So that's what I want. Yeah.
Thank you. I also saw there's a Q&A. Qing has a question. Perhaps given we are over time, so the author can contact Qing to address the comments.